Well, guys, with 2018 rapidly approaching its endpoint, it is now that time of year again where we start to talk about all of the films that have come out this year, give a generalization. And guys, 2018 has been a huge year at the movies for me. I have seen the most movies that I've ever seen in any year. There's been over 200 films that I've watched. So doing a top 10 list would just not do this list justice. Now, while I'd love to do a top 20 or a top 30, a lot of the films I don't really have a lot to say about. I just kind of hate them, and you know, there were some that I just did not get a chance to review, so I'm not going to say a lot, but I am in fact going to do a top 15 because there are definitely a lot of bad films that I did see that I do want to talk about, and we're just going to get started right now. So, of course, as usual, we're going to start off with some dishonorable mentions, which there's actually quite a few. It's unfortunate, but also it's a fortunate thing because I don't really want to think about these movies all that much. Now, quite a few of these, I actually didn't review on this channel because I didn't really have much to say about them, but I am going to finally talk about them now. So my dishonorable mentions are as follows. First up, we have Mile 22, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, Daphne and Velma, Winchester, Shock and Awe, Slender Man, Acrimony, Anon, Terminal, Mute, Flower, and An Evening with Beverly Loughlin. And then these last five, I am shocked somehow did not crack this list, but Best Friends Volume 2, the worst theater experience that I've ever had the misfortune of watching. Which, if you guys want to get more into that, you can definitely check out my review over there, but it was absolutely dreadful. The Package, one of the worst things Netflix has done for sure. The Toy Box, a movie that I actually did not get to review, but that's really because I didn't really have a lot to say about it. It's pretty much just a very generic, awful horror film that I really couldn't stand. The Princess Switch, and this one I am shocked did not get on here. Stepsisters, just such an awful film overall that one of the worst things Netflix has done. You're going to hear that a lot, but anyway, let's just get into the top 15 here. And like I said right off the bat, there are going to be some films on this list that I unfortunately did not get to review. This one I did review, just not on my channel. And look, there are some this was not a terrible year for family films. There were some really great stuff like Christopher Robin and Mary Poppins Returns. That is the standard of what we need to get. What we need to see go away is stuff like Woodpecker. I mean, everything about this film is so bottom of the barrel in terms of children's entertainment. It is trying to cater to the lowest common denominator possible. When you have an actor like Timothy Odmanson, who's so charismatic and so fun, and even he can't bring anything, that's when you know this is a terrible film. There is such a forced environmental message. The comedy is terrible. The acting is almost universally bad. The real only saving grace was sort of the Woody Woodpecker actor, but even that wasn't enough to save it. Timothy Odmanson's wife girlfriend is one of the worst characters of the entire year. I could not stand her in this movie. I thought she was so annoying here. The animation, like I said, is really not that good at all. Just everything about it is what we don't want to see in a terrible children's film. Thankfully, it didn't come to theaters at least, but it still is the epitome of what people talk about when they talk about really awful children's entertainment. It is rightfully at number 15 for those reasons, and definitely not something that I really want to see again. I'm glad that these films are going away, and I'm hoping that Woody Woodpecker continues. I'm hoping that this, just further confirms that we are definitely moving away from this type of kids film, because it's definitely not what we need to be getting. Now, coming in at number 14 is a director that always seems to end up on my list somewhere. Tyler Perry, you've done it again. You didn't make a Medea movie this year, but you did make something just as obnoxious with Nobody's Fool. I saw Acrimony earlier this year, and I genuinely thought nothing would be able to top how infuriated I was with that movie. Nobody's Fool irritated me so much more than that one did. Everything about this movie just feels so unnecessary. The plot is non-existent here. There's so much going on. The movie itself kind kind of feels like a sitcom at points. The characters are all terrible. Tiffany Haddish is so obnoxious in this movie, just constantly yelling at this like all the time, constantly just yelling about everything, and it gets really annoying after a while. It's so horrifically bad. The sex scenes in this movie are awful. The comedy is terrible. Everything just feels so improv and so haphazard. Nothing about this movie feels even somewhat coherent. Tyler Perry, I know you don't like to make these movies anymore, and I question why you still do, honestly. These are as bad as you can possibly get in terms of comedy, and it is everything that I don't want to see. Definitely deserving at number 14 for sure. Now, 13 and 12, I'm honestly going to count as a group here because they're very similar movies. Show Dogs and Pup Star World Tour are both terrible films that I basically hate for the same reasons. These films are so obnoxious. The Pup Star films are so 50-50 with me. The first film I hate. The second one is an amazing guilty pleasure, and this is just about the worst one they've done. I mean, everything about it, you can tell that this concept, they just don't know what to do with it anymore. I just can't stand it. The whole gag of seeing dogs sing, it is very much worn off. It is just so stale, and the plot, like I said, is pretty much non-existent here. And then Show Dogs for the same reason. I mean, at least with Woody Woodpecker and stuff like Pup Star, that stuff isn't in theaters. This actually is. The fact that this actually got a theatrical release is baffling to me. I don't know why this felt like a movie that would come out in the early 2000s. It has some of the worst casting decisions in any of these films that I've seen in so long. Ludacris as a dog, are you kidding me? I couldn't stand that at all. The jokes here are so LCD. It was a film that was so bad that I started to write down notes in the theater of how awful the dialogue really was here. Everything about Show Dogs, I couldn't stand it all. I hated Pup Star World Tour for basically the same reasons, and that's why these are both 13 and 12, because they're both equally just as terrible and pretty much are bad for the same exact reason. Now, you guys know I'm someone that really loves crime dramas. I think it can be very interesting, but you know, this was a very good year for them, but every so often there's one that just absolutely sucks, and Gotti absolutely is the biggest example of that this year. I mean, everything about this movie is the worst decision possible. I've already talked a great deal about the marketing campaign. It's probably the worst I've ever seen. I mean, when a studio is deliberately telling you that critics are lying and that you can't trust them, I mean, it's just being very deceitful, and it's not being very honest and just admitting, okay, yeah, we didn't make the greatest film. For some reason, that's what they're trying to do here, and I didn't really understand that. But then when you couple that with what we're given here, I mean, this story is so paint by numbers. There's so many things they skip over. The story itself is just very confusing. You don't really know what they're trying to do. John Travolta as Gotti really does not work at all. As much as he's trying here, it does not work. You really don't buy him as John Gotti. And John Gotti himself, you really don't get to know who he is. And then on top of that, you have that really obnoxious score by Pitbull of all people. I don't know why that's in here. Spencer LaFranco as his son is absolutely atrocious. I hated everything about that character. I couldn't stand him in this movie. Just everything about this movie. There's so many things that they just kind of gloss over. The passage of time is really off here. I couldn't stand it at all. It's one of the worst crime dramas of the entire decade, and it is rightfully at number 11. Now, you guys know I'm someone that usually really loves art films. I mean, hell, most of my top 30 list is going to be comprised of art films, but, that's for another video. But every so often, we get one that I just can't stand, and this year, it is, without a doubt, How to Talk to Girls at Parties. I mean, this is a film that definitely did pique my interest because, it's A24. It's got a really great cast. It should be right up my alley, but it's not, because this entire film is nothing but metaphors and just trying to search for some sort of meaning. Elle Fanning is very miscasted here as this robot. I really could not stand her in this movie. Even the characters I liked, like, say, our main lead here, there's really nothing to him. I really didn't see anything to latch onto there. The story itself makes no sense. The mythology makes no sense. There's a lot of weird moments in this movie that are just kind of weird, just simply because they want to be weird and it doesn't really work at all. What was that one concert sequence? One of the weirdest and just oddest things I've seen all year. I don't know what the point of that was. The whole movie, I was just trying to search for the deeper meaning, and I still have yet to really figure out what that was. Again, I know there's a lot of people that love this film, but it very much rubbed me the wrong way, and for that reason, it is definitely number 10. Number 9, we go back to Netflix with another awful comedy. Father of the Year is, again, as bottom of the barrel as you can possibly get. The plot here is almost non-existent. There's really not much happening within this story. It's just David Spade and Nat Faxon and them being really annoying. Their sons also being very annoying. Bridget Mendler occasionally popping up to save the film, but even she can't really save it because she's not in it enough. But the two actors here, they're just so annoying here, but especially when it comes to David Spade's son, whose name is escaping me right now. He was gloriously miscasted here. The humor was so unfunny and gross. I'm sure, I mean, I'm thinking of that horrible scene in the doctor's office involving everyone showing off their asses, and that was just disgusting to watch overall. Just one of the worst comedies that Netflix has done. This was a really bad year for Netflix, and this film very much shows why. Now, number 8 is another one that I'm sure not a lot of people have heard about, but it is a film that is absolutely terrible. I hate everything about it, and that's Status Update. I mean, what a ridiculous premise right off the bat. Just this idea that this guy, everything he does, just, everything he does pretty much, he picks a search result and it happens to him, and we've seen this concept done so many times before. Ross Lynch does not look like he's in high school at all. The high school environment is one of the most unrealistic I've seen in so long. There's so many awful characters in this movie, like the popular girl's mother, who has this very weird sort of relationship with Ross Lynch to the point where she wants to get with him, and it's really creepy. Then you have the guy who sells him the app, who's being all creepy. Then you have the stuck-up rich girl, who's literally just that. Then you have the one guy that keeps following Ross Lynch around that's gay and clearly wants to be with him. I mean, there's just a lot of really weird characters in this movie. It was so annoying. The message was so obvious. It basically was a Disney Channel movie, but if it was PG-13, and it really solidifies everything I can't stand about those movies. Just everything about this I really hated. It's a terrible film that not a lot of people saw, and thankfully not a lot of people saw, but it definitely is very deserving at number 8. Now, number 7 is a film that I recently reviewed, but since I saw it, I just can't seem to get the bitter taste out of my mouth, and that, of course, is Life itself. I mean, this is a film that I should love. It's a character drama, and it should be a very rich, layered story, but the entire film, the sole intent is just to get a reaction out of you. It doesn't care about developing its characters. It doesn't care about deepening its story. It wastes so much talent within the film. Most of the actors just don't seem like they give a shit here. Dan Fogelman, as much as I have liked his writing on This Is Us, I don't think he knows what story he really wanted to tell here. He jumps around so much. There's so much stuff that just made no sense here. They throw so much at you at once that it just becomes irritating. It becomes a very aggravating and very hard to watch experience, and it's understandable why so many people were infuriated with this film. It makes sense why this film did not have the buzz that it really wanted to have. It's one of the worst, I think, dramas of this entire decade. I really couldn't stand it at all. There's so much talent that's wasted here. If you haven't seen it, don't. It is definitely not worth your time at all, and it is very deserving at number 7. I really couldn't stand this at all. Now, number 6, we have another one that seems to pop up in here all the time, and that is the final entry in the 50 Shades series, which admittedly wasn't as bad as last year's, but keep in mind, this is, I think, only one spot down from last year, so it's not really saying much. This is still an awful final film in every sense of the word. I mean, every single scene in this movie, there's really not a plot for a while. The ice cream scene is absolutely disgusting. The film really goes all in on just trying to have the most unappealing sex scenes possible. There is a ridiculous fight between the two. I mean, we all remember that great email scene that was just awful here. The movie turns into an action movie at the end. It doesn't really work at all. Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan, I mean, we've seen Dakota Johnson deserves much better than this, but they just do not care at this point. Their chemistry, once again, is just not there. You're just kind of questioning throughout the whole movie why Anastasia is even with Christian Grey. I've gone on long enough about these movies. Just thank God it's done. I hate them so much. Everything about them is just so shallow and so pandering. It's the exact kind of movie we don't need anymore, and I'm just glad it's over, and that is why, I mean, I've gone on long enough, but that's why it's at number 6. Alright guys, so now we're in the top 5. This is the worst of the worst. These are the ones that, if you haven't seen them, I really recommend you shouldn't at all. They're the ones that annoyed me the most. Starting off with number 5, which this was a really good year for horror. There were a lot of really great horror films out there, but there still were some real terrible ones out there, and Truth or Dare is easily the worst of the bunch. Everything about this movie just feels so corporate. The fact that this whole movie was made from basically a Snapchat lens, and that lens became so popular because of it. I mean, that alone just shows how dumb this movie is. But then when you get to the premise, I mean, it's laughably dumb. There's nothing to really latch onto here. The characters are awful. You know, it's not scary at all. It just does not do what you want to do. It tells a very formulaic story. But then, of course, it has the audacity to be also really offensive with that one certain plot twist that comes up. And the ending is easily one of the most infuriating of the entire year. I just really hated everything about Truth or Dare. It was just such a scareless film that really had no mystery whatsoever. It felt so derivative, and it's the exact type of horror film that I don't really want to see more of, and thank God we didn't see a lot like it. But you know, there were some instances, and this is definitely the worst of the bunch, and like I said, it's definitely deserving of number 5. Alright, so these next two you guys may say don't count because they are both TV movies, but honestly, they piss me off so much that I couldn't possibly leave them off the list. Number 4 is a sequel that I don't know why I watched. I really don't know why I decided to watch this, but Lifesized II is number 4. For some reason, I thought this would be fun. I thought this would be a fun watch with my friends, and it turned out to be the exact opposite of that. This film was so obnoxious and dumb, and it tried so hard, you know, to be so much more edgy and mature, and it just fell so completely flat. I mean, just that scene when the two of them are waking up in bed together, it is just absolutely atrocious to watch. Tyra Banks gives the worst performance of her entire career in this movie. I mean, she wasn't even good in the first one, but she's way worse here. You can tell that she just does not know how to act at all. I could not stand her in this movie. There are so many things that happen here that are clearly supposed to be heartwarming, but they just come across as creepy. Our main character here is a self-centered bitch that deserves every awful thing that's possibly happened to her. There's so many awful pop culture references. Every single character is basically a stereotype, and what they did to that theme song, which I was not a fan of, mind you, is just awful. Anyone that was a fan of this, it is abhorrent what they did to that theme song. I can't believe that it turned out the way it did. And the ending of this movie, it's supposed to feel very sort of heartwarming and kind of sweet, but it just ends off in such a creepy way. Just everything about this film rubbed me the wrong way. I couldn't stand it all. It's everything a sequel shouldn't do. It felt so unnecessary. It felt basically like a rehash of the previous film, and that is why it is at number 4. Number 3 is another one that needs no introduction. I already hinted at a status update feeling like a Disney Channel film, but number 3 is actually a Disney Channel film, and that is probably one of the worst remake that I have seen all year, and that's Freaky Friday. I mean, there was so much potential with this. It was a musical, you know, it was based off the musical adaptation, it was a Disney Channel film, it was bringing to a new audience, there was a lot they could do here, and instead, they give the worst portrayal of this story yet. These two characters are so unlikable. Heidi Blickenstaff was just horrifically bad in this film. Her daughter wasn't much better either. Cozy, whatever her name was, I couldn't stand her either in this film. It's annoying. The dialogue is just horrendous. The directions they go with this film are really bad for kids as well. There's a really awful message for them in here. The songs aren't memorable. It's just everything that I can stand about a Disney Channel movie. It really pissed me off. There really isn't a single good thing about it. It's probably the worst thing a Disney Channel has done in a while, and that is why it is at number 3. Again, I know it's not a theatrical release, but it's one that pissed me off so much that I couldn't help but put it on here. Now, unlike last year, this really wasn't that bad of a year for comedies. Largely all the theatrical releases, most of them I really did end up enjoying. There were a few stinkers in there, obviously, but most of the ones that I thought weren't going to be good actually did turn out really good. And then, of course, we have Netflix to come around and remind us where all those bad comedies really do lie. And that's where the last two actually do fall. Both of them are Netflix movies. Both of them are comedies, and they're both absolutely atrocious. Starting off with number 2, which is without a doubt the worst teen film of this entire year, one of the worst of the entire decade, and that's The Kissing Booth. I mean, everything about this film is just everything a high school movie shouldn't be. It's not realistic. It focuses on just this one couple throughout the whole movie, and that's kind of it. All the problems resolve around this love triangle, and that's really it. The main character is completely over-sexualized. She's a terrible role model. There's nothing to like about her whatsoever. The acting is atrocious, and the fact that this movie was made off Wattpad, which I actually did not know in my review, which is why I didn't bring it up, but the fact that it was made off Wattpad is baffling to me. The fact that we're actually getting movies based off of Wattpad articles, which is the equivalent of fan fiction, I don't know what else to say about this industry. If that's actually where we're going, I'm worried for this industry pretty much. But everything about this film, you guys know how much I hated it. I really don't want to go on about it any longer, but there are so many awful jokes in here. There's so many ridiculous sex scenes in here. The character shifts are illogical. It doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. It's a film that is purely just there to, you know, be this really annoying teen film. And the fact that we might actually be getting a sequel to it, I'm really not excited for at all. I hated basically everything about The Kissing Booth. It's one of the worst instances of a high school film. There's nothing about it that's realistic. There's nothing about it that's authentic. It's everything that a high school film shouldn't be, and for all those reasons and more, it is definitely number 2. Now, once again, number 1, a lot of awful Netflix comedies out there, but nothing, and I mean nothing compared to number 1, and that is Game Over Man. I mean, this is one of the worst comedies I have ever seen, without a doubt. I mean, I hated The Kissing Booth and things like that, but that's nothing compared to this film. There's not a single joke in this movie. It's just as many gross-out gags as they can possibly do. So many dick gags in this movie. So many gags of them just throwing things into the crowd. There's vomiting gags. There's that awful scene where they had to eat someone else out. There's really, the gross out stuff in this movie is nonstop, but then when you factor in the 3 here, these are the workaholics leads, and the fact that they can't even save this movie is just really devastating to think about. All 3 of them, there's nothing to them. They try to give some character development, and it really doesn't work at all. The humor really didn't work for me. It's so lowbrow and not funny at all. There's so much talent that's wasted in this movie. Aya Cash, I mean, she's so great in You're the Worst, and she's completely wasted here. I couldn't stand her at all. It's one of the worst offerings that Netflix has ever done. I think it's right behind The Babysitter for me. I couldn't stand it at all. It's so pandering. It's just so dumb. And again, if we're actually getting a sequel to it, I don't know what else to say about this company. I've gone on long enough. Netflix is terrible with their decisions, and they need to stop signing on to fucking everything, because then we get shit like this, and The Kissing Booth, and The Package, and many numerous other films. This was an awful year for Netflix. There were some really great films towards the end, but for the most part, they really need to stop. They really need to start rethinking their decisions, because when they sign on to shit like this, it just does not look good for their reputation. It further solidifies them as the alternative to direct-to-DVD, and I'm really hoping that they are starting to rethink things, because, like I said, this year was just so terrible for them, and this film very much does show that. And again, there were a lot of really awful films, but I don't think anything came nearly as close as this film did. This was unwatchable. I can't believe that I actually made it through this film. It was so boring and repetitive, and there were some things that were just absolutely painful to watch. It's everything I hate about comedies, and it absolutely deserves to be at number 1. And with that, guys, we have come to the end. And as usual, I actually did have a lot of fun doing this. It's fun talking about these films that I really hated, everything they did wrong, why you shouldn't try to go out and see them. If you like some of these movies, that's fine. More power to you, of course. But just in general, I really couldn't stand them at all. I think they're some of the worst. A lot of them are some of the worst I've seen this decade. And especially the Netflix ones, definitely try to stay away from those. I mean, they are as bottom of the barrel as you can possibly get. But either way, guys, that's really it for this video. Let me know what you guys thought of any of these movies. Love to hear your thoughts on them. As far as 2018 goes, in terms of terrible movies, I'm done. Thank God, because I have a lot of movies that I do actually still want to watch. I'm not going to get my best list up until Saturday, so it will be a little later this year. Maybe not. I think it was around the same time last year. I'm not entirely sure, but I am going to be doing it on Saturday. Look forward to tomorrow, Christmas Day, where I actually will be having a really big announcement coming up. But like I said, got a few more movie reviews to do, and then my best list will be up by Saturday, so definitely look forward to that. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.